Pat Summitt was one of our nation's great leaders for the advancement of women in sports. As our celebration of Title IX continues, our panelists share stories about their friend and mentor.
You cannot say enough about the contribution of Pat Summitt to the University of Tennessee and to the Lady Vol program. She is a setter in the standards of what we needed to do in competition, whether it was men or women's competition. And Pat Summitt was a great person to work with. And she carried the Lady Vols to a national prominence that nobody else had done. And she took that out, and the university was proud of it, and the university did all it could to support her. The president used to come and ask me every spring, here's what he needed for the Lady Vols, and we'd say, okay, we'll write that number in the budget. And that's what had happened, because he was proud of the Lady Vols, and Pat Summitt set those standards for him, and to this day, you can never back off from what her contribution was. It's forever. And we have a statue of her here to memorize that and to make that, I think, one of the great periods of time in this university. Bob Nealon had one, and Pat Summitt had one. And those two people have set some standards here that have become national bearers for the University of Tennessee.
You know, I think it's appropriate that we're here today talking about this at the Pat Summitt statue. And truly, Doug's exactly right. What a standard for all of our coaches, men's and women's coaches. Pat was effective in leading everybody. And so I think we have a lot to be proud of. And I think that's why when she said left foot, right foot, breathe, let's go, we all fell in line. And I think that was important.
You know, I used to visit a lot in my role as sort of internal ops. I had a lot of interaction with staff in the men's athletics department, more than a lot of other people did. And I never will forget having a conversation with one of the assistant football coaches who said to me, he said, Donna, I walked in to see this recruit, and he goes, Tennessee, checkerboard end zones and Pat Summitt. And so he, you know, it was everywhere. It was like Coach Dickey said, put us there, which also had to do with the logo and all of those kinds of things.
This gentleman started the checkerboard end zone,
Well,
so we,
right.
yeah.
One of the big decisions, though, was when Pat came to us with Joan. I remember we had the meeting in my office. We had built Thompson Bowling Arena, and the men had been playing basketball in Stokely Athletic Center, and they were going to move to the new. We had a dressing room and everything in here built, and they were going to move into the new center. And Pat and Joan came and said, what about us? Why don't we go play in the new arena? And they might have been drawing 2,500 people where they were playing. But we said, okay,
We
you
sold
go.
out the first game.
You go. You go there, and by golly, the crowds came, and before you know it, they're outdrawing the men's program. And she took it and did a great job. And taking that in that big arena had a lot to do with Pat Summitt's successes of having a great place to play and a great crowd to play in front of.
When I interviewed for athletic director here, this building was under construction, and we were not going to play in the arena. And I told Pat, I said, I don't want to be athletic director here if we're not. And, you know, said, you only get one chance to make that good first impression. And she agreed, and the university immediately agreed. And so that happened, and I think that is true. That made a huge difference in our program.
And I'd like to add, just to continue to speak on Pat Summitt's influence, it was a standard that was set, and she not only was so influential for the coaches, but for all of the Lady Vol athletes. And I'll share a story. This would have been my junior year, and at that time for softball, you played, it seemed like 100 games a season. Well, we lost a game, but that was rare. We didn't ever really lose, but we lost a game, and we show up, and our coaches say, go to the arena. Coach Summitt wants to talk to you. And we're like, what? You know, and that was the longest walk. No one said a word as if she could hear, you know, us on the trail. But we went in and we sat in the desk, and, you know, it was like, felt like 20 minutes before she walked in. But she let us know that that was not the Lady Vol standard, and that it was personal to her to make sure that we gave our best every single day. It wasn't about basketball, it wasn't about soccer, softball, it was about the Lady Vol legacy and upholding that and helping it to grow. And we didn't lose many more from that, and when we did, we were really upset about a loss. But she was very pivotal for myself and for my team, but for every Lady Vol, because she was so in the know with all of us and with every program, and really held us to a higher standard than we held ourselves to at a lot of times.
You know, I know when we expanded sports, when we were talking about expansion and what we were to add and how we were to go about it, and there were so many balls in the air that we were trying to navigate, and which sport went first and how, and people like Ann Froh stepped up and with Joan and a great group, and Pat got the entire team endowed before we even signed our first golfer. I mean, we had all the scholarships endowed for that entire team. And so, you know, we started golf, and soon after, rowing and softball followed. And, you know, Pat was a part of all of that. I mean, she was always a part of how can we be better as a department? You know, what can we do? How can we support each other? How can we grow this department? And, you know, so much support to Joan, and, you know, she would point Joan in the direction of maybe a heavy hitter donor, and Joan would go in, and Pat would come by and, you know, seal the deal with Joan. And so that kind of collaboration was decades long. I mean, Pat coached for 38 years here. Never was there a moment that she didn't, you know, put that first and foremost. You know, few people realize that track and field won our first national championship for the Lady Vols. And Pat, you know, had been to the dance and had gotten to the championships and had gotten to the championships and gotten to the championships and had come up empty. And probably the happiest, proudest person was Pat for Terry Crawford and the team. Because, you know, she said, you know, how did you do that with 6 freshmen, 3 sophomores, and a junior? How did you win a national championship? There were 10 athletes, 10 that made one. Benita was a part of that. You know, and that just put the fire in Pat's belly even more. Like, okay, we need to step up. We haven't done this yet. You know, we've got to join track and having that. And then everybody else. We're all going to be in the top 25. We're going to be in the top 15, top 10. You know, Joan set that standard when she came in 1983 and upped it.
You know, I always felt, and we talked about equal sports, and we really did. I wanted each of our teams to be in the top 10 in the country. And therefore, we worked hard to get our budgets in the top 10 in the country for that sport. That didn't mean they were all equal, but they were all, the track coach had a top 10 budget because that's where we knew we wanted them to be. Same thing with the new sports as we added. We didn't add to just add a new sport. We added to be successful in that sport. And I knew immediately we were going to be successful in softball. That was very, very exciting. But we talk about Pat and her support. When I came here in 1984, it was the 84 Olympics in LA. I did the Chevy Chase family vacation across the country to watch Benita run and win a gold medal, and to watch Pat Summitt coach the Olympics.
Holly, you spent a lot of time with Pat. What was it like seeing her impact around the country, around the world, and not just in women's basketball, but in all athletics?
Well, one thing great, these are such great stories, and I think Pat just kept it simple. She just had a passion for the game, passion for sports, was a great leader, always wanted to make sure everyone was put in a position to win. She wanted women to be able to afford the opportunities as men, no matter what sport. We would play a Friday night, we would play Louisiana Tech, and then Saturday we would play Ole Miss. And we're like, Pat, what are you doing? She goes, it's good for the game. I said, well, we got to put W's, we got to get wins. But everything was always what's best for the game. And I have so much respect for Pat for that. And I don't care how many games she won, just she was extremely humble. But the minute we won a championship, she was like, how are we going to win the next one? And how are we going to win the next one? So her drive, her passion just separated her from everybody else.
I think it's important to note that Pat Head Summitt had a passion for the University of Tennessee. And that fueled a lot of what she was willing to do and a lot of what she wanted to do for this campus and for all of the sports. And it wasn't just the women's sports. She would talk to football recruits and basketball recruits and golf recruits and swimming recruits or whoever for the men's coaches. And they had a camaraderie that was really special. I remember we were recruiting a women's basketball player from Ohio, who also happened to be a huge college football fan. And so I don't know if it was Holly or who it was, but somebody said, hey, Donna, will you see if we can get so-and-so over to football practice? And I said, sure. So I called football and said, can we bring this recruit to practice? Yep, bring her, whatever, bring however many people you want to. Where's she from? And I said, Ohio. So we watch practice. At the end of practice, every football player from the state of Ohio came over to introduce themselves to her and to welcome her to campus. So the kids signed. I mean, it was that kind of interaction that was really special.
Well, so many people are thankful for what you all have done for the University of Tennessee and continue to do. And I just want to say thank you for coming and spending some time and sharing your all's stories and the things that you did to make women's athletics at the University of Tennessee and across the country what they are today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.